Hello there, and welcome to my channel. I'm so glad you're here, whether you're settling into bed, unwinding after a long day, or simply letting your mind drift into the quiet hours. This space is made for you. Tonight's journey will take us far from comfort into the heart of one of the most extraordinary true stories ever lived. The story of a man who ran for glory and then fought for survival. A man whose path carried him from the cheering stadiums of the Olympics to the endless horizon of the Pacific Ocean and into the darkest corners of a prisoner of war camp. Before we begin, may I ask, where in the world are you listening from? It's always powerful to imagine these stories reaching across time zones, through open windows, and into rooms where curiosity never sleeps. If you enjoy deep, thought-provoking explorations like this, I'd be truly grateful if you could tap the like button and subscribe. And to those already part of this thoughtful journey, thank you for returning, because tonight we will walk with Louis Zamperini from the roar of the Berlin Games to the deafening silence of a life raft adrift for 47 days and into the brutality of captivity, where survival depended on more than just strength. It depended on a will that refused to break. This is not just history. This is the anatomy of human endurance, and the proof that even in the darkest places, a flicker of light can survive. He ran for glory, but ended up running for his life. In 1936, Louis Zamperini was a young athlete, swift as the wind, a symbol of hope for his country. The roar of the Olympic crowd lifted him as he pounded the track, his every step a testament to discipline and fire. But fate had written a different race for him, one far from the polished lanes of Berlin. One where the finish line would mean survival, and the track would stretch across the endless, merciless ocean, and into the iron gates of a Japanese prison camp. The cheers that once rang in his ears would one day be replaced by the drone of engines, the metallic rattle of gunfire, and the deafening silence of being lost at sea. Imagine the sudden drop from triumph to terror, the stark transformation from national hero to a name that might be whispered in the past tense. Picture it. The rhythmic chant of a stadium fades, replaced by the low hum of a bomber slicing through the Pacific sky. The clouds part, the water glimmers below, and then disaster. Metal screams, engines fail, and in seconds, Lewis's world shatters. The track is gone, replaced by an inflatable raft. The crowd gone, replaced by sharks circling beneath. The finish line gone, replaced by a horizon that never seems to draw closer. How does a man survive both the ocean and the enemy? How does an Olympian, conditioned for speed, adapt to a fight that demands patience, cunning, and unbreakable will? This is the journey of Louis Zamperini, a story that begins with hope, is forged in suffering, and ends in a victory no medal could match. Tonight, we follow his footsteps from the stadium to the sea to the shadows of war. Louis Zamperini was not born into greatness. His early years in Torrance, California were far from the disciplined life of an Olympian. The son of Italian immigrants, he grew up in a community where fitting in wasn't easy, teased for his accent, often in trouble for petty theft, fighting with anyone who crossed him. His restless energy made him a constant source of worry for his parents, but it was his older brother Pete who saw that this wild energy could be shaped, guided, turned into something remarkable. Pete pushed Louis into running. At first, it was just to keep him out of trouble, but soon, the streets he once roamed aimlessly became his training ground. Every mile he ran stripped away a piece of the reckless boy and forged a sharper, faster version of himself. By the time he reached high school, his speed was drawing attention. His name began to appear in local papers, then in statewide competitions. And before long, he wasn't just a boy from Torrance, he was a runner chasing records. By 1936, at only 19 years old, Louis had earned a place on the US Olympic team, bound for Berlin, Germany. It was a time when the world was already on the edge of conflict. But for Louis, the Games were the ultimate stage. The Berlin Olympic Stadium roared with tens of thousands of voices as he stepped onto the track, His event, the 5,000 meters, was grueling, but Louis was built for endurance. In the final lap, he unleashed a sprint so fast that even Adolf Hitler requested to meet him afterward, shaking his hand and remarking on his remarkable finish. That moment, standing in the heart of a foreign nation under the eyes of its dictator, was surreal. But Louis didn't know then that the discipline, the mental fortitude, the ability to push through pain until the very last step, would become more than just athletic skills. They would be the very tools that kept him alive in the years to come. Years when the roar of the crowd would be replaced by the crash of waves and the applause by the shouts of captors. His Olympic glory was just the beginning, the starting line for the most harrowing race of his life. When the world once again edged toward the brink of chaos, Louis Zamperini traded his running spikes for military boots. In 1941, as the shadow of war spread across continents, he enlisted in the US Army Air Forces. It was a decision that would take him far from the familiar tracks and stadiums and into a new kind of race, one measured in miles of sky and moments between life and death. Louis was assigned as a bombardier, a role that demanded precision, steady nerves, and a willingness to fly straight into danger. His aircraft was the B-24 Liberator, a heavy bomber known for its long range, but also infamous among airmen for its mechanical flaws. Its bulky frame made it difficult to handle, its hydraulics were prone to failure, and every mission meant pushing both man and machine to the edge. The Pacific Theater was a vast, treacherous arena. Unlike the compact battlefields of Europe, here the distances were staggering. Hours of flight over nothing but deep blue ocean, knowing that a single malfunction could mean drifting for days if rescue even came. Bombing runs often meant threading through walls of anti-aircraft fire, with shrapnel tearing the sky into deadly fragments. Japanese Zero fighters could appear in seconds, swooping down with merciless precision, and each mission required not just courage, but an unshakable focus. The roar of the engines was constant, the air inside the cabin stifling and thin, and at any moment the calm could shatter into chaos. For Louis, the discipline honed on the track became a shield in the skies. The same mental steel that had carried him through punishing races now steadied his hands over the bomb release. Mission after mission, he stared down the ocean's endless horizon, aware that beneath its surface lurked dangers just as lethal as the ones above. There were moments when the sky itself seemed to turn against them, violent storms that tossed the bomber like a toy, blinding rain, and winds that rattled every bolt. But nothing could prepare him for the mission that would change everything. The day when the ocean he had feared from above would become his only road, his only prison, and his only chance at survival. It began as a mission like so many before, but this time the crew was flying the Green Hornet, a B-24 already infamous among its pilots for being temperamental. The aircraft had been called into a search and rescue operation over the vast Pacific. Somewhere below, another bomber had gone down, and Louis Zamperini, pilot Russell Phil Phillips, and their crew were tasked with finding it. The sky was clear, the sea stretching endlessly in every direction, but inside the cockpit the tension was thick. Then, without warning, the right engine sputtered, coughed, and failed. Moments later, another followed. The bomber lurched, losing altitude. Metal groaned under the sudden strain. There was no time to think, no time to pray, only the rush of wind, the scream of the descent, and then impact. The Pacific swallowed the bomber whole, shattering it into twisted fragments. 11 men had been aboard, only 3 surfaced, Louis, Phil, and tail gunner Francis McNamara, clinging to 2 small inflatable life rafts as the wreckage sank into the blue void. The ocean quickly proved itself a merciless captor. Days blurred under the punishing sun. The salt air burned their lips and split their skin. The heat baked them during the day, and at night the cold gnawed at their bones. Thirst became a living agony. Rain was rare and precious, each drop caught like treasure. Hunger clawed at their insides, the small stash of chocolate rations gone almost instantly. The horizon mocked them, nothing but water in every direction. Below, shadows began to form, dark shapes circling the rafts. sharks, drawn by the scent of wreckage and the faint vibrations of movement. Sometimes they bumped the raft, testing it. Other times they leapt, their sleek bodies flashing in the sun before splashing back into the depths. One day, a Japanese aircraft spotted them, but instead of rescue, it strafed the rafts with machine gun fire. Bullets punched through the rubber. The men dove into the water to escape, only to find themselves between a hail of gunfire above and the circling predators below. Weeks passed. Mac's strength faltered first. The lack of food, the heat, and the endless strain eroded his will. One morning he lay still, his eyes half closed, breath gone. Louis and Phil, hollow with grief, committed his body to the sea, and then they were two, clinging to life through sheer force of will. They caught small fish with their hands, trapped birds that landed on the raft, drank rain when it came, and drifted through storms and sun until their bodies were nothing but bone and determination. 47 days after the crash, salvation came, but it wore the wrong uniform. A Japanese patrol boat loomed on the horizon, its crew armed and waiting. The men were pulled aboard, their skin blistered, their muscles wasted. They had survived the sea, but their next trial would make the ocean seem merciful. The Japanese patrol boat carried them to Kwajalein Atoll, a small, isolated outpost in the Pacific, known among prisoners as Execution Island, a place from which few returned alive. The camp was nothing more than a cluster of crude huts surrounded by barbed wire, but its reputation was built not on its size, but on the brutality within. Guards greeted Louis Zamperini and Phil with blows before words, stripping them of what little remained of their strength. They were interrogated harshly, accused of being spies, denied basic food, water rationed to the point of cruelty. Each day blurred into a cycle of pain and exhaustion. They heard the shots of executions carried out in the distance, saw the hollow-eyed stares of other prisoners who knew there would be no rescue here, yet Louis refused to let himself sink into that hopeless gaze. After weeks of torment, Louis and Phil were transferred to a series of POW camps across Japan, each one a new hell. In Omori Camp, located in Tokyo Bay, Louis met the man who would become his personal tormentor. Mutsuhiro Watanabe, nicknamed the Bird by prisoners, was a young guard with a cruel streak matched only by his obsession with breaking strong men. He saw in Louis not just an American prisoner, but a symbol, an Olympian who represented everything he wanted to destroy. The abuse was relentless. Beatings with belts and clubs, being forced to hold heavy beams over his head for hours. Repeated humiliations meant to strip away dignity, yet Louis endured, not through brute force, but through an iron will that refused to let the Bird see him defeated. The war dragged on, and Louis's body became thin, his face sharp with hunger, but inside something unyielding remained. He found small acts of defiance, meeting Watanabe's gaze without flinching, standing straight even when his muscles screamed, refusing to cry out during beatings. These were his victories, invisible but real, and they kept him alive. Other prisoners took strength from his endurance, seeing in him proof that the human spirit could outlast the body's suffering. Every day was a battle not to let the camp turn him into something less than himself. And when whispers began to spread of an Allied advance, Louis held on tighter, knowing that if he could survive just a little longer, there might be a day when the gates would open and the shadows of the camps would fall behind him. In August 1945, the war came to an abrupt and thunderous end. Japan surrendered after the devastation of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and Allied prisoners across the Pacific awoke to a silence that felt almost unreal. At Omori Camp, word spread in whispers at first, then in shouts. Guards fled or dropped their weapons, and for the first time in years, the prisoners stood without fear of a sudden blow. American planes flew overhead, dropping food, medicine, and clothing. Louis Zamperini, rail-thin and hollow-eyed, stepped out into the sunlight, breathing air that no longer belonged to his captors. He had survived Kwajalein, Omori, and the unrelenting cruelty of the Bird. Now, The ocean that had once threatened to claim him would carry him home. When he reached American soil, the welcome was overwhelming. Crowds, reporters, friends, and family hailed him as a hero. But inside, the war had not ended. The battles followed him into civilian life. The nights brought dreams of Watanabe's face, of blows raining down, of the helplessness that had once pressed on him like a vice. Sleep offered no peace, and waking hours were clouded by rage and a gnawing emptiness. Alcohol became his escape, dulling the edges of memory but slowly corroding everything else. His marriage strained under the weight of his temper and his drinking. The man who had once outrun the world now found himself running from himself. Every reminder of the war, every sound, every smell could hurl him back into the camps, and the darkness within threatened to consume him. Until, in 1949, his wife convinced him to attend a revival led by a young preacher named Billy Graham. That night, something shifted. The words struck through the fog of bitterness, reminding him of promises he had made in the life raft, pleas to God for deliverance, promises he had buried under years of anger. Louis found the strength to put down the bottle, to confront his past, and even to forgive. Years later, he returned to Japan, not for vengeance, but to meet the men who had been his captors. Some he embraced. Others, like Watanabe, refused to face him. Yet Louis still forgave him in his heart. It was not for the bird's sake, but for his own, a final victory over the hatred that had tried to define him. Louis Zamperini lived on for decades, sharing his story of endurance and grace, proof that survival is not just about the body, but about the choice to rise above the very darkness that tried to destroy you. Louis Zamperini's life remains one of the most extraordinary testimonies to the strength of the human spirit, from a troubled boy in Torrance, to an Olympian on the world stage, to a soldier, castaway, and prisoner of war. His journey defied every limit the world tried to impose. His survival was not just a matter of endurance, but of an unbreakable decision to keep living when surrender would have been easier. And in the years that followed, he proved that survival is only the beginning. Forgiveness, even for those who sought to destroy him, became his greatest act of defiance. His story has been immortalized in Laura Hillenbrand's book Unbroken, and in the acclaimed film adaptation that brought his trials and triumphs to new generations. But beyond the pages and the screen, his legacy lives in the hearts of those who hear his name, a reminder that no matter how deep the darkness, there is always a way forward. And perhaps the most powerful truth of all is this: Louis Zamperini's greatest victory wasn't in the Olympics, it was over hate itself.